Hey Dean,
Hey Vito,
how are you this week?
I'm excellent. How are you?
Oh boy, am I excited for today. Uh, we have our guest for the day, something we've been working on for a while. I'm very excited to introduce them to everyone. Uh, Gentleman by the name of Jonathan Ames. He's the author of several books, including Wake Up, Sir, What's Not to Love, and I Pass Like Night. His novels, The Extra Man and You Were Never Really Here, have been adapted into films, and he's the creator of two television series, Blunt Talk and Bored to Death. He's also collaborated with Dean on the graphic novel The Alcoholic. His latest book, Karma Doll, is the third in a series about Los Angeles private investigator Happy Doll. In this darkly humorous detective story plagued by death on his conscience, Happy Doll has committed himself to a simple spiritual life. That is, until a tragic and brutal murder forces his hand and sets him back on the bloody path of retribution and justice. Welcome, everyone, to Jonathan Ames.
Well, thank you, Vito. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks for hopping on our little grassroots show that we do here.
Mhm.
It's just a recent thing, actually, right, Vito? It's been what, 2, 3 months now, maybe?
Yeah, we're up to this is our 12th episode, so we're closing in on 3 months now. Yeah.
Oh
Yeah,
my God, it's cool.
yeah.
Well, I wanted to start this conversation with you, Vito, to kind of respond to Karma Doll, Jonathan's recent novel, because first of all, have you ever read any of Jonathan's prose? I
I
assume you
have
read The
not.
Alcoholic.
I did read The
Okay.
Alcoholic, yeah, but I didn't read any of his books up until this one.
And so you were talking to me about how what you felt reading it, and it kind of activated, inspired you to write, if I'm
Yeah,
correct.
I hope this doesn't. I hope this comes across as um, complimentary and flattery as I intend to. But I've been trying to write a novel for about 5 years, and I've just been picking at it, working on other things instead, coming back and forth to it. And something about reading this, and in truth, I listened to the audiobook because it was more of an uninterrupted session. So I was actually sitting with your voice, Jonathan, for
Mhm.
hours on end.
Hmm.
And something about this book, like this, I actually started rereading it
Mhm.
this week because I enjoyed it so much. It's absolutely one of my favorite books I've read since probably Black Dahlia by James Elroy, which was in 2000 that I read it. So um, absolutely enjoyable. And every night after I would read, it would just, I don't know if it's, I wouldn't call it competition because I feel like you're in a league of your own. I think we all are.
Mhm.
But it just inspired me to sit down and write, like, and just get closer to finishing this thing that's been taking 5 years of my life. So
Hmm.
thank you, number one, for inspiring me, and thank you for the enjoyable read.
Oh, you're welcome. This second time around, are you listening again or reading to see how it looks on
I'm
the
kind of
page?
doing both. I'm reading along with you reading along. So
Hmm.
it's almost like you're reading to me, like I'm kind of reading it like along with it, just because I
Hmm.
want to try to get I want to immerse myself again because it was I told Dean like I was enjoying it and enjoying it and enjoying it, and then the last chapter had I lost my mind. It was amazing. Like I
Hmm.
just like I loved it, so I kind of want to get that feeling again. And now that I'm rereading and re-listening, I am finding a couple of things that like I didn't from a uh, not a critical point of view, but from a authorship point of view, I'm like, oh wow, I didn't realize he was doing that. For example, I was starting to reread Joseph Campbell's Man with a Thousand Faces, or Hero
Hmm.
with a Thousand Faces, I should say. And I didn't realize it at first, but this is totally a hero's journey.
Hmm.
Like he starts off, he leaves home, he's in a foreign land, he goes into the underworld almost literally, and then he comes back home. It's so like it's so fulfilling that way because like I didn't even realize that he actually did the formula. Like it's great.
Well, that's interesting. I have to admit, I've never read Joseph Campbell. I've heard about it for years. I remember like maybe reading the first page and being like, "Oh, this is cool," but like I for some reason never read it. So it's interesting that this story that appeals to you, and thank you.
Mhm.
I'm pleased that it does, that it, jived with. your reading of Campbell, and that, maybe that's why it did succeed. It had some classic, like most stories, classic tropes that we identify with and creates catharsis. And I think it's interesting that you felt inspired to write a book, and you said it's the first book you've maybe been into in a while since reading The Black
Yeah.
Dahlia, because I always, but you're trying to write a novel yourself at the moment and have for a while, but I used to teach writing, and I always used to tell my students, write what you love, write the kind of stories that you enjoy reading, because that's what you're apprenticing in, that's what you're absorbing, that's what the lessons you're sort of learning, and then also that's what you're enjoying. And so then you want to make that for someone else.
Mhm.
And, that there's readers like that out there for you. So if my book somehow, can be, for lack of a better word, like a role model, or, because that's how I'm constantly reading detective novels because they inspire me and they make me want to write in that form. And, I do read other books sometimes, which are enriching for their sentences and aren't necessarily crime fiction. But I read a ton of that stuff because I'm always apprenticing and they inspire me. So, and I think it's good to, not, people always talk about artists borrowing, to borrow structure, to borrow form, to borrow a voice, things that then it becomes your own voice that inspire you, and that helps you. It's like a map,
Mhm.
like someone else went down this road. I'm going to kind of follow their map, but with my own spirit and soul.
So, Jonathan, that's one of the things I've always, one of the great pieces of advice is to find joy in the sentences you write, and then others may enjoy it too, right? And I've tried to adopt that recently. But, and I didn't have this as a question, but we're going to get questions from our conversation as well. We're talking about being inspired. So Vito's been recently inspired by you. I've always inspired by you. But when early on, when you were enjoying detective crime novels, who were you digging back then, and who are you reading now that inspires you, or is it the same answer?
Well, I have, which is a funny answer to, let's say a crime fiction question. I have a lot of the usual suspects. Um, Long before I started writing more page turners, because part of my whole thing is I became addicted to the page turner, that feeling
Mm-hmm.
when I'm reading that I can't stop reading. Now, I personally don't listen to audiobooks. I never have. And I've never read anything electronically. I'm like just books. I've just always the physical object. But I love that experience, like someone might experience a form of music where I have to keep turning the page. So the page turner. But my first 20 years of my writing career, I wasn't writing those kinds of books. But early in the probably late 80s, early 90s, I began reading Raymond Chandler, then Dashiell Hammett. Loved that stuff. But that wasn't the kind of books I was reading. I was also reading a lot of other kinds of literature that influenced my first three novels. I Pass Like Night, The Extra Man, Wake Up, Sir. Like those had very different literary influences. But all along, I would always come back to Chandler. I would read and reread the Marlowe novels and short stories. I love Chandler's prose. And what's interesting is that Raymond Chandler went to the same school in England as P.G. Wodehouse. And P.G. Wodehouse was a huge influence on me, brilliant comedic British writer that I very much mirrored my novel Wake Up, Sir, honoring the work of P.G. Wodehouse. Anyway, so both Chandler and Woodhouse were at the same school, and I'd love if I was the kind of researcher, I'm like, who was like the teachers there? Like those two guys got such a great education, these two wordsmiths, and they were at the same school in England around the turn of the century at the same time. So anyway, eventually, the writer that really kicked me off into writing crime fiction was Donald Westlake
Mhm.
under his pseudonym Richard Stark. I began reading those books in the late 2000s, and there's 24 of these novels about a criminal named Parker. And I just, and he was like very much like Dashiell Hammett just would write these like hard-boiled rivet gun sentences that just excited me and great plots, super fast moving. And you could just keep reading about this Parker for 24 books. And I began reading those over and over again. I used to describe it like a crazy person who'll only eat canned tuna fish. Like for a while there, I was only reading Parker. Every now and then other books would come in, but it was like I was, it's like someone only being able to listen to Miles Davis or something. So eventually the Parker books led me to write my first bit of crime fiction. Well, actually, it was my second bit because my first piece of crime fiction, which was an homage to Chandler, was Bored to Death. I wrote this long short story in 2007 for Esquire magazine that got rejected, but that became the basis for the TV show that Dean worked on, of course. And anyway, but then after Bored to Death was canceled, I finally wanted to write a piece of like hard-boiled crime fiction that had no comedy. In part because for like 3 years at HBO with Bored to Death, every year it was like, make it funnier, make it funnier, make it funnier. And I was like a clown who was exhausted. So I wanted to write something without any humor, wrote You Were Never Really Here, then got back involved with TV again, and then eventually got to the doll book. So a long-winded answer. So Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, Richard Stark, and those are like my three big influences. Also, David Goodis, who's got an incredible collection called Black Friday, and he wrote many interesting books. I think his work inspired or was stolen to inspire the TV show The Fugitive. He also wrote a novel that became a Bogart movie, Dark Passage. And then Truffaut, I think, made a movie out of a Goodis book, Shoot the Piano Player. And anyway, Goodis was a big early influence. And then the last few years, I love Michael Connolly. I enjoy Robert Craze. Megan Abbott's a great crime writer. I recently read an incredible crime novel, In a Lonely Place by Dorothy Hughes. There's so many great practitioners of the form.
Have you ever read Jim Thompson and Mickey Spillane?
Oh yeah, I've read probably 15 or 20 Thompson books. I haven't read Mickey Spillane. Thompson, sometimes he comes to mind in terms of like, well, I just love the pulp writers and how quickly those guys wrote and allowing Dahl to be broken is a very Thompson-esque
Absolutely.
quality, but I don't think of him as much because mostly the guys that I respond to were writing series. Also, Ross McDonald is a big influence on the Dahl books. I like these series because there's a certain like endurance to writing book after book about a certain character. And so the guys who and gals who've written the series, they're kind of my big role models.
Which is like Vito, like this is your first introduction to Happy Doll is the third book. Was it
Right.
confusing at all?
No,
I
not at
mean,
all. Very
okay,
easy to follow. I mean, I think the crimes that happen in the beginning that sent him to Mexico are kind of, oh, did that happen in the second book, or is that something that happens in between the books? But that's really the only, kind of, I don't want to say disconnect, but that's the only kind of hurdle that I have to, mentally jump over. But that's really simple. It's just, all right, just keep reading. Like it's
Yeah.
not like I obviously plan on reading all of them at this point because this was so enjoyable. But as a singular book, I didn't really feel like I was missing out on anything.
Yeah, that's always the hope that you have to, kind of do some bit of recap or some reintroduce the character, but so like that if someone did come in, they can jump right in. And then for the people that have read the other ones, there's not too much regurgitation or the regurgitation is pleasurable. Now that backstory stuff that you're referring to, that was a very tight summation of everything that had happened in the second book.
Mm.
And so and yeah, Carmadol picks up in my mind about 14 hours after the end of The Wheel of Doll. And The Wheel of Doll followed a man named Dahl by about 9 months, and like in the chronology of his life.
So I don't know how spoilery we can get or how spoilery we will allow ourselves to be, but one of the things that I found almost incredibly efficient was how the story starts, like you said, 14 hours after the last one, and then there's a jump that takes place from the beginning of COVID to the end of COVID, and it's such a like I would have never, seen that happening. Like I think most novels would take you through every month of COVID, and taking you through all of that. But the best part about it is it starts, I'm reading it in 2025, and it starts prior to that happening. And then the lockdown happens, and then it's 3 years later, and Happy, aka Lou, is going through like his life. His friend Vic has passed away. He's more or less, I don't want to say assumed his identity, but he's taken on his home and is just comfortable. Like he's just, living a life that a minimalist life, almost Spartan life. And it just, the jump is so, it's not jarring, but it's so breathtaking in that sense of like, oh, now I can breathe again. Like you feel like your hero is free to roam and free to be, and then we hit him with all the other stuff that starts coming. Meeting with the actress, the other guys coming to find him. It just starts picking up there, and you feel like you're reading one book and it comes into another. It's amazing.
Hmm. Well,
Did you
cool.
have like a did you have a similar kind of lockdown experience or anything like that? Like were you like writing this during lockdown or
Um, I when did I begin this one? I don't think it was lockdown. I've written the three doll books from 2019 to 2024, kind of one after the other. I think this one I must have started in like maybe August of 22. And then also different writing projects here or there. Um, or maybe no, yeah, I think it started in 22 because now we're in 25, but I finished in 24. Anyway, it's all confusing, but no, I wish I had a COVID experience like he describes. My literary agent very sweetly wrote, "Now I know how you would have liked to have spent the COVID years because, you know, Happy's in Mexico on the beach." But yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you described because I wanted to pick up right after The Wheel of Doll, but then I didn't necessarily want to write about COVID and I don't even remember the organic process of like, you know what, I'm just gonna summarize those 3 years, but it sort of fit with the story because he was on the lam, and I think I've seen novels do that, and I also I do part one, part two, then within each section there's numbers to create a linear experience, a fast-moving experience for the reader, and yeah, I made that leap ahead of time. I'm trying to think there was some point I wanted to make about that, but I think it was a way to not have the action of the book dealing with masks and things like that. And but it was also oh, here's my point is that every doll book, and when I write this crime fiction stuff, like I think A Man Named Doll takes place over like 4 days or 5 days. Like it's in a tight paced time frame, and then The Wheel of Doll is like 4 days. And so we're
Mhm.
really living with this guy going through stuff, either trying to find people, chase down people in duress. And yeah, and so Karma Doll, like the first part is about 2 or 3 weeks because he's healing and this and that, and maybe it's about yeah, maybe the whole thing is like a month, but fairly fast paced moving, and then you jump ahead 3 years, but then after that again it follows the formula of like everything now takes place in 3 crazy days. For what I mean, it's not like
Mhm.
about a story that takes place over months. Like part of what creates the urgency is that we're in a very compressed time frame.
But the thing I think that I hope other readers will catch is that the 3 years of solitude creates this sense of safety,
Hmm.
and the idea that we bring that, pull that rug out from under him right after that is makes it. I think the real thing that I'm really impressed with is that it's such a modern day story. Like you can read it and you can exactly know where you were when this was happening yourself, and kind of picture everything happening to Happy as it happens in the book and as it happened to us. And I applaud that. It's so well done. It's so clean.
And,
Like
and it goes with the title. It goes with karma. It goes with
yeah.
like it's like a Buddha. It's almost Buddhism in some weird way. Like he gets to and if you know Happy's story, if you've read the first two novels, which you haven't, Vito,
Mhm.
you almost are like grateful that he gets to have this
Right.
vacation, let's call it, of
Right.
sorts.
And the karma, of Karma Doll, like the whole Buddhist retreat and the whole cleansing his soul and stuff. And it just really works towards building that expectation up, I think.
Yeah, I actually, please forgive the nature of me asking certain questions that I wrote down, but it was just easier for me. And I actually wrote these down a couple of weeks ago, so I'm just going to ask some
Well,
questions
called,
here.
called being prepared, Dean. You're a pro.
Look at that, huh? Um, all right, so here's the first question. The protagonist's name in your recent series of neo-noir novels is called Happy Doll, for reasons one should read to find out why. To my recollection, there have only been two other literary characters named Happy. There's Happy Loman from Arthur Miller's play Death of a Salesman, and Hap Collins from Joe R. Lansdale's Hap and Leonard novels, later adapted into a TV show. Did the name Happy Doll come before the story, or did it arrive as a function of the story? In other words, did you come up with the name first and had to figure out why he was named that, or did the story come first and gave birth to that name? Bottom line, why call your hero anti-hero Happy Doll?
Yeah, good question. I wonder, it's been a while since I wrote the first book, right? And I think I could be, I'm not sure, but in The Alcoholic, if the character in The Alcoholic, who's not me, but was sort of like a stand-in or funhouse version of me, I made him a pulp writer because back when I was writing The Alcoholic with you, which would have been 2006 to 2007, um, I back then was like fantasizing that I would be a pulp writer, but I
Mhm.
still hadn't made that leap yet. But I made the character in The Alcoholic a pulp writer in part so that I could see really fun, cool pulp covers that you drew with pulp titles. And was one of those titles A Broken Doll Plays No More? Or I
Something like that.
maybe, but I check that out because I think for a long time I'd had this title in my mind, like real pulpy, because pulp titles in some ways are kind of terrible sometimes. And so, but terrible in a good way. And I think I had this title, A Broken Doll Plays No More. And I think I wanted to call originally A Man Named Doll was a short story that Lee Child, who right there, Lee Child, who is famous for the Jack Reacher series. I had met him, gave a reading together, which was cool, and a bunch of other writers. And I was asked to write something for Akashic Books Noir series that was edited by Lee Child, and it was called Nicotine Noir, or the Nicotine Chronicles. And the stories had to be a crime story involving cigarettes. So I started writing what became A Man Named Doll, and I thought, wait, this is, I think, bigger than a 10-page, $250 short story for Akashic Books. I'll put this to a side and write something else, which I did. And somehow in writing that, I must have like still been obsessed with this title, A Broken Doll Plays No More, a bad pulp title. And so then I must have wanted to name this guy Doll, and I originally named him Hank Doll, but then I, for some reason, thought, what if his parents like had named him Happy Doll, not knowing like how they'd be saddling him with a crazy name. So he went by Hank Doll. But by the second novel, he now tells everyone his name's Happy Doll. He doesn't use this fake name anymore, Hank Doll. And so that was another journey or transformation. So how like it, and then once I committed to that though, like one thing I read about Donald Westlake slash Richard Stark, he sometimes he said regretted calling his character Parker because he could never say Parker parked the car. He always had to be like Parker left the car, like it drove him crazy, like you know. And but he called him Parker. So for me, it's like, oh my God, every book I've got to sort of acknowledge that he's got this crazy moniker, but it's come to work because he's very much an unhappy doll, but he like all humans, he wants to have a little bit of happiness. He doesn't believe, as I do, that you can ever be happy all the time. That's not what existence is about. But anyway, so yeah, it's just interesting that he got saddled with this name. I saddled him with this name, Happy Doll.
But you did, and I think it's gonna come into play even more. Like you subconsciously probably gave him that name because it can spark confrontation. And I actually have another question about. I have a few more questions about
Did you
the
see in the
Karma
book,
doll.
was there a broken doll plays no more?
So
Is that,
I looked at the alcoholic
yeah,
this edition, and there's one page where
we have the pulp
there's
cover.
a it's like what the eye doesn't see is one
Uh-huh.
page, and then there was a whole page of books, and there's nothing about that at all. But I'll show
What
it
are
to
the
you.
titles though? What are the titles?
So I'll read you the titles. I'm showing everybody on the YouTube the page, and the titles are "The Lost Girl," "The Killer's Sweetheart," "The Music That Kills," and then these are my favorite: "The Third Sex," and "32 Positions."
Oh my God. Oh my God. That
32, and it's a Max Irwin mystery. So he went under the pseudonym Max Irwin, I believe, in this
that's
version.
right. That's right. So he had a pseudonym and everything. Oh my God. I didn't remember any of those titles.
It's
Uh,
hilarious, man.
yeah, I remember though I saw a line in a Somerset Maugham short story where Um, it was a woman or a man, I'm not sure which, didn't know that their partner or their wife or husband was having an affair. And the line was, what the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't know.
Mm.
And it was a beautiful line, though maybe the heart does know. But anyway, and then 32 Positions, that had been an early title of what was going to be maybe my second book, which I never wrote or I wrote failed. I think it's actually in a suitcase moldering in my garage. I had like I think at least two failed novels before I wrote my second book. I had a bad case of second novelitis, and but that one was going to be called 32 Positions because in the Kama Sutra there's like 64 positions, and this was going to be about a character who'd only gotten halfway through or something like that, and was also though like saw these positions as kind of almost like pictograms that they were sending messages to himself. And it was sort of playing on this Paul Auster, one of Paul Auster's New York trilogy, a character, a private detective or someone is following someone through the streets of New York. And he slowly realizes that in these huge walks, the character is writing a message. Like if he went 80 blocks up Broadway, then went at an angle, like it was like the letter M, like on the map of New
Right,
York,
right, right.
slowly spun. So my character was like studying these sexual positions that he may have found himself in because he thought he was sending a message to himself that was spelling something out. Anyway, that was a failed book
I
and
don't
but
know, man. I think some of that snuck into that could be a happy doll. There's something there. I think you can still use
I
some of
threw
that.
that title in there though. But anyway, The Lost Girl. I think that might actually be a early Chandler title. I probably didn't know at the time, but
So here's another question, if I may, and then Vito, hop in when you want. But I
Yeah,
definitely
yeah,
have a
yeah.
bunch here. So, all right, in Karma Doll, Happy is having an existential crisis and wants to free himself from the burden of doing what's quote right, because doing what's right often comes with murder and mayhem, and he just wants to be left alone. He's smart, but he also makes mistakes, and that often backfires on him emotionally and physically, literally. Slight spoiler here, but as of the third novel, Happy is barely recognizable, even though he's reached a certain apex of self-contentedness, despite all the pain and sorrow. Can you talk about the evolution of character and why it's important for protagonists to change?
Um, yeah, well, one of the things like in the Ross McDonald series about a private eye named Lou Archer, who was played by Paul Newman in the movies, they called it Harper for different rights issues. And a lot of those books, like the private detective doesn't change that much, or you don't get into their inner life that much. You still find it very compelling. Like Marlowe, maybe by the last book when Chandler was older, like Marlowe kind of starts falling for a woman and maybe he's going to follow her to France or something like that. But so this is different though, and this is where maybe had my roots in literary fiction, which is about getting inside someone's mind and how they deal with the struggle of being a human being. And so basically, along with trying to tell mysteries and page turners, Happy's grappling with love and the past and emotional trauma from childhood and all his struggles are also present while he's like, yeah, as you say, trying to do the right thing. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
in the third book, he kind of wants to drop out of being a private investigator because things always go wrong or he hurts people. And I mean, justice tends to prevail in these books, but it exacts a price on him, and he doesn't want to kill human beings as a way to solve problems. But in the first two books, he does, and this haunts him, even if it was in self-defense or even if these were so quote unquote bad human beings. Because as
He
anyone,
even tries to avoid, like I think in Carmadol, he tries to avoid, like I don't want to kill people, so I'm going to remove myself from most of society. You know?
yeah, well,
Climax
and
of
because he
climax.
doesn't want. Yeah.
Okay, good, Jonathan.
Yeah, well, he doesn't want to generate any more bad karma for himself also. And then I thought it was a really interesting proposition, as you guys know from having read it. He really tries to go out of his way in the third book to track down the bad guys, defend himself, get justice for others without directly killing anyone. And I almost felt like I had in mind like a martial artist, like I love, all crazy martial arts movies. I really enjoy them. And I just thought it'd be the coolest martial artist who is like, well, that's a lot of martial arts are about using the bad guys energy against them. Like I forget which one is not jujitsu. Is that a little bit? That's on the ground. There's another one I'm blanking on the word. Aikido, where if someone's coming at you, you take their power, you misdirect them. And so in some ways, like if this was like a real cool martial arts movie, this, set like in the 11th century, he would be this master who, like people might charge him, but he would just misdirect them off a cliff. Like, you know what I mean? Like he
Yeah,
wasn't
totally.
killing them himself. So that's kind of what it was sort of an undercurrent for me with Doll. Anyway, I know this is also being filmed, so I
That
seem
was
to be getting
great.
a kick out of my hand movements.
Well,
Well, it's
what I was
funny
going to
because
say
my
was that the climax, like he doesn't take an active role in eliminating anybody. It's almost as if karma takes over, like
Yeah.
for all of those deaths.
Yeah, well, he does orchestrate it though, and I saw
Sure.
something similar, and you know, people have done that in other books and movies, and probably, I mean, this is like not the real world, of course, by any means, and but yeah, I'm glad you liked that climax. He orchestrated all that, and yeah, the book is still very vivid in my mind. I think I was editing it up until September, but yeah, I don't remember. Well, I guess I remember certain scenes from The Wheel of Doll, A Man Named Doll. One of the things that's fun about writing these books is that, and you guys love comics and all sorts of forms of art is that I'm painting these pictures in my mind and then trying to render them in prose, which is what all writing is, so that people then can see it in their mind. But these are very, there's, and I guess some books could be more internal, but this is a lot of action and place and bodies moving and happy moving through the physical world. And so I see it in my mind, and then I try to, like a movie in my mind, of course, and then I try to come up with sentences that the reader can then create their own movie that's perhaps close to the movie I saw in my head, but their own version of it.
Speaking of movies, there's a fun part in the early parts of the book where Dr. Feldman is talking about The Postman Rings Twice and a couple other movies that he
Hmm.
watched late at night. So if Happy Doll is anything like Dr. Feldman, what movies would he have watched to become the private investigator that he becomes?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, yeah, I haven't necessarily thought like I think I have had Dahl comment on, well, in the second book he's reading, I think, Watership Down.
Hmm.
He has eclectic reading tastes. And I don't know, I've had him comment on movies too much, but in Carmadol, he has seen, the Gregory Peck, Moby Dick.
Yeah,
Um, I don't know what detective films he might have seen, but I'm sure he would appreciate, um, Elliot Gould's The Long Goodbye, because that would,
I
it's
knew you were
also
going to say that. I don't know
right.
how, but I knew
Right,
it.
right in this neighborhood where Dahl lives is also the very interesting apartment building, or apartment up this very strange elevator. And I'm always blank on that oh, Robert Altman. Yeah, so when I first moved to LA, a friend of mine took me over. He was like showing me because I moved to LA to do my TV show Blunt Talk, and I wanted to get to know the city in the same way with Bored to Death. It was like fun to film in the places that I enjoyed walking around, and mostly in Brooklyn. And I wanted to do some of that with LA. And I went and saw the apartment where Elliot Gould lives, which was really cool.
All right. I have another question. Uh, in Carmadol, you coined the term, quote, easy to hit, hard to put down.
Hmm.
Where did that come from and what does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, Dahl says that when someone asks him if he was any good as a boxer, and and then I was somehow thinking about Dahl that in all the books, he gets hit a lot, and also part of the trope of the private detective novel, at least with Chandler and Ross McDonald and Robert Cray, who wrote the Joe Pike, Elvis Cole mysteries, for those who might be listening that are familiar. Um, and I wrote a piece about this, I think it was for Crime Reads, and I think Chandler very much started it, and Dashiell Hammett too, because Chandler was so inspired by Dashiell Hammett, where the detective gets knocked out, usually hit from behind, sapped in the back of the head, or drugged, and Chandler just had all these incredibly vivid poetic descriptions about losing consciousness. And so I tried to put those into every book. And then I saw Ross McDonald did it. And I think, and then I know how deeply influenced Chandler was by Hammett. And Hammett had a great detective, the Continental Op. Most people associate Sam Spade with Hammett, but the Continental Op was Hammett's main protagonist. He wrote hundreds of pages of short stories about him and one incredible novel called Red Harvest that influenced the Coen brothers and the movie Blood Simple. Because at some point the Continental Op, who's having to kill a lot of people to get this town in order, that he's a Pinkerton agent, the equivalent of a Pinkerton agent, but for an agency called the Continental Agency, and he goes and cleans up a whole town, but he ends up keep killing people. and he said he was turning blood simple, as if like the taking of blood was the answer. So that's like where the Coen brothers got blood simple. And anyway, so I don't know. I guess I was just thinking how Happy just always gets hit, but like over these three books, you can't kill him, like, and I try to keep it within medical reason, and Dean knows from having read the first two, and it's not, and you saw in the third book, he gets massively hit on the back of the head with a
Yeah.
champagne bottle, and he's swimming in the ocean. He gets shot in the leg, he's got food poisoning, but it's nothing compared actually physically to what he goes through in the first two books. Though, though in the third book, he shows up wounded, and at the end of the book, he gets, literally destroyed again. So I just always like, this writer once told me, Dean, went to Yaddo. And this older writer, one time at breakfast at the artist colony Yaddo, where I know Dean has gone several times, there was some piece of writing advice from the famous 30s movie Blaue Angel, and there might have been like a writing teacher or a playwright in it, Blue Angel with the famous I don't maybe it was Garbo, where some professor says like in literature, if you're a writer is ever struggling, torture the heroine, like kind of perils of Pauline. And when I taught writing, I would tell my students, torture the hero, torture the heroine. So with the
Mm,
doll books, I take this to an extreme where he's like
mm.
literally tortured every book. All again, a long-winded way of saying, and he also had done some boxing, that he was easy to hit, but hard to put down. And so that's what he figures, should be on his grave stone, kind of like in the W.C. Fields way.
Did he say
I
something like his chin is his jab or something as well?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
how many more books can you write and before he dies? I mean, like maybe two, three tops,
Oh,
like
yeah, I don't know. It's like I it'd be amazing, and I don't know if I could sustain it. And because, I know like when I used to write essays, and Dean, that's sort of how he met me. Dean was reading my essays in the New York Press. And I did that for several years, and then I began to repeat myself, like I had become shtick, and I never want that to happen with the doll book. So, like
right.
you want to keep being inspired, and but also, I don't know how many more years of writing life I have, and so I don't think I'll ever be able to approach like something like Ross McDonald did, 18 books, or Westlake with 24 books, or even Chandler, who really only wrote, I don't know, like maybe 7 books total, and some of those are his short stories, and then a bunch of his novels, as you guys may or may not know, or your listeners, that a lot of Chandler's novels, he took these stories that he was publishing in pulp magazines and blended them together in like a Frankenstein way, rewriting a lot of them and then cobbled them together to sell as novels. Like I think until, I mean, The Long Goodbye, no, not even The Long Goodbye was cobbled from, I think, a short story. Maybe it's the very last Chandler novel, Playback, was the only one that wasn't like him taking these short stories he'd written in the 30s and then smashing together. And and so anyway, I think he had about 5 or 6 or 7 books, and 2 or 3 of them are either the short stories that he cannibalized or standalone short stories that he didn't cannibalize, and then maybe 4 or 5 novels.
We always have 32 positions in your back pocket. Here's another question. This might be one of the last questions regarding Doll, and then I have a few after that, if you don't mind. So here we go. You created Joe, who I don't think has a last name, in You Were Never Really Here, Happy in the Happy Doll series. And without spoiling it, I know you've invented a third protagonist that you're currently developing for a potential new series. Do you see yourself world building like how Quentin Tarantino does in his movies and books? Can you imagine writing a story where your different characters cross over?
Yeah. Yeah, the book I'm currently writing, I don't know if it would be a series, but maybe it would be. I yeah, I don't necessarily need or want these characters to meet each other. It could be sort of fun, or for people who've done a deep dive of reading it. I mean, the Joe character I thought I was going to continue with, but then I ended up not after the movie was made. It was something got sort of fulfilled. And also, I had sent the beginning of the sequel to the director, and that influenced her ending of You Were Never Really Here, which was different from the book. And so and then also that was a kind of hard character to write because he was so dark and so broken, and it was in the third person, written wise, writing wise. And I tend to my natural form is the first person, which Doll is. The one I'm currently writing is third person again. But I don't know if they'll blend, but one person who's done this masterfully is Michael Connolly. And Michael Connolly has written over 30 LA-based novels, and he's got four characters that are like the heroes of these books. One famously Bosch, became the TV series. And then this new character he introduced 5 or 6 years ago named Renee Ballard. And now some of the books are Ballard and Bosch books because those two characters, they interact a lot together. And then the Lincoln Lawyer books, which became a movie and a TV show. And the Lincoln Lawyer books and Bosch totally blend because the Lincoln Lawyer is a half brother to Harry Bosch. They didn't know
Mm.
each other growing up. They found that out later, which is amazing. And then he's got this fourth character who's a journalist who writes, for the LA Times. And so it's really cool what he's done. And the way he does it, you really love seeing like, here's the Lincoln Lawyer in a Bosch book.
Right.
And I just so admire his multiverse that he created. But I don't think I'll do that. But you never say never, right? It sounds like a James Bond title, but what was that?
I have a que-
Um,
I have
Go
a
ahead,
question
Vito.
about going back to Carmadol before we move on. Um, I was saying to Dean a couple of weeks ago, like after we both finished reading, um, I said, "Does Jonathan have a dog?" Because the absolute adoration and love you have for George, or that Happy has for George, I know you have a dog. Dean confirmed that to me, but just the way you write about him, like the one of the lines that I love is, "I'm one of those broken people who love their dogs too much," and like I number one, I totally relate to that. I used to have a dog, pit bull by the name of Kirby, that uh, broke my heart when we had to put him down.
Yeah.
But like, just every scene that he's in, when you describe how he sleeps on the pillow, or how he sleeps next to him, or leading the pack of dogs to fight El Diablo, like it's so like you clearly love this dog, George, at the very least, in the book, where you tease something bad happening to him, but it doesn't come out to be that way. So how much do you love your actual dog? I have to know, and how much of your dog is in George?
Yeah, good question. I mean, Dean has met the role model for George, and he is a dog that is extremely lovable, as are almost all dogs and cats. And yeah, so no, I'm crazy about my dog, and I guess I got him. He's a rescue in 2017, and I started writing A Man Named Doll in 2019. Um, and summer of 2019, I also had moved to this new neighborhood, which in LA, which I found really inspiring. And so, yeah, both those things, like writing about this neighborhood called Beechwood, and then my dog, yeah, my adoration for the dog comes through. And a lot of people, I mean, I'm not so aware of it in the same way, like I can't really hear my own voice, or the way we all can't, because I'm like, when I do hear my voice, I'm like, oh God, I can't stand the sound of it. Nasal, kind of affected, it's like, oh. But in the same way, I'm not maybe fully aware how much my adoration of the dog comes through. I mean, clear, I know that Happy loves his dog and he mentions him a lot, but it's the way people are like, you must really love your dog. So I think it's coming through even more than I realize.
You,
Like,
you
Dude, it's not even
happy.
adoration. It's not, I wouldn't even use the word adoration because when you read the first book, it's pornographic.
Well,
you know,
there's a
they
part
are
which,
they are one. They are one, but also Happy is also, as he says, broken, and he has a hard time being loved or loving others, and so, he's pretty alone. But with the dog, he's able to have a connection. And it's, and dogs, like I was seeing something on the internet, they have like a deep emotional life. Like my dog, goes too many hours without a walk. I mean, he's wonderful. He doesn't complain, but he really looks mopey and depressed, And then as soon as the leash comes out, joy is there again. So like he's got an active emotional life. And I also had this thought the other day, as cute as we find our animals, they must find us like cute too or something. I heard that elephants think of humans as cute, you know? So,
well, I think like there's the thing that really comes through in the fact that how much you adore your dog, like in real life, is that Happy's always aware of that he hasn't peed in 2 hours,
mm,
or I have to take him out in the rain. Like it feels like you might have been like typing this out, and then you're like, oh yeah, I got to go take him out, and like almost as a reminder to take him out, you wrote it into the book or something because it's so real. It's such a real thing as a dog owner to feel like that kind of, I don't want to say anxiety, but that responsibility of being a pet owner and having to take the dog out or having to feed him something, or, where, like, I think at one point in the book, there was no kibble, like he had no dog food. So he had to, figure out how to feed the dog, like these are like real things that pet owners, go through. And I think it's just such a, such a good way to make happy attainable and tangible and real.
yeah, I mean, again, not fully aware, because yeah, you have an inner schedule with a dog, like, okay, got to walk him in the morning. You also want to keep them contented. And he gets so much joy out of walking that it feels almost cruel to. Sometimes though I get a lot of work done and I'm just sitting here and I can't let him out into a yard. I have to be out there, and even then it's some risk because there are coyotes around here. But
Mm.
during the day it's pretty safe. But every now and then I have seen a coyote during the day, and one time he did chase a coyote during the day. He's got a Napoleon complex because he's a little guy. And but anyway, but yeah, that's just that inner schedule. So I'm aware, like, Happy's got a dog, he's got to walk him.
And I love that you gave him a friend because like that's one thing I have cats, as you know, and I wouldn't necessarily have a dog in an apartment in New York City. I think that's cruel. And I don't even want to talk about crates, especially with what just happened recently with Gene Hackman.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, I was really excited. Walter, is that the name of the cat in
Mhm.
the book, right? And I was just like, that was so cool and like such a new point of energy that you brought to the happy home, as it were, and I was really happy. And actually, are you allergic to cats? I forget. Would you ever consider bringing your dog a cat friend in real
Um,
life?
well, probably not, because one of the reasons I was able to adopt my dog, whose name is Fezzik, was that the family that adopted him after he was found, I think he was found on the street, like leashed to a fence or something like that. And so some family did adopt him, but they had a cat, and he just, like he was very aggressive, Fezzik, to other dogs. So then he also can become very loving to other dogs and very aggressive towards cats. I mean, I don't know, it would probably take forever to integrate a cat
Right,
into
right,
his
right, right.
psyche. But I based the Walter cat. I once had a cat years ago, in the early 90s. I was driving a taxi in Princeton, New Jersey, and I crossed like a street in this, suburban area, and thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye as I was driving. And I looked in the rearview mirror, and there was like a little white cat in the middle of the road. And
Mm.
so I pulled over, uh, you know, and I think the cat may have let me pick him up, or maybe it ran onto a yard and I saw, okay, he's safe. And I called out, is anyone like, I don't know, something about the cat seemed like it was very alone. And then it went back out into the road again. And I picked it up and I might have been calling out to people, is anyone like missing their cat? Like, because it was also going the middle of the road and they're just sitting there. And it was very
Mm,
tiny. It was almost like a kitten. And anyway, I just felt like I couldn't leave it because I felt like it was going to get hit. And then I must have perceived maybe there was something, now that I think of it, there was something about it not moving as the car approached. And it turned out the cat was deaf. It was an
oh,
all white deaf cat. So I brought it home and I must have listed like with local animal, like if anyone was missing a white cat, but no one claimed it. So I ended up having this like cat I got super attached to for 2 years. And
mm,
I loved him, but then I named him Lewis. But then I had to uh, leave Princeton. I was going to grad school and I couldn't take the cat. And I gave it to this very nice woman who had a dog. And man, I wept when I parted from that cat,
oh.
though.
I thought you said you're going to put him back. You put him back on the road.
No.
Okay, a few more questions. You've made TV shows that requires many people, and you've written a graphic novel that requires a few people.
Mhm.
Besides the obvious differences, what does collaboration do for you? Why is it important? And why is it important to produce solo projects? What does that do for you?
Yeah. Well, I think I'm mostly, a solo artist. I like just, especially the last few years, as I've gotten older, I and have calmed down. I really like writing more and more. Like I like just being alone at the desk. I used to struggle, to finish my books. It would take me years, and there was um, and also partly because like I was more interested in my life than in my writing or something. It was like I was squeezing in the writing, but obviously I cared about it, loved literature. But I really like being alone now, just working on my books, playing with sentences. Um, but I also had a lot of pleasure collaborating. I really enjoyed collaborating with you, Dean, when I wrote the script for The Alcoholic, and then you would send me the pencils, and we really had a mind meld. Like I would describe what I thought should be in the panel, and then be like, oh my God, that's exactly what I look like. Or you'd be like, hey, I want to try this instead, or I'm gonna, and then I loved your innovation. So we had a really cool symbiotic collaboration. And then working on the TV shows, which was just like a freak of nature in my own existence, I was able to do it because I had two experiences of collaboration. One, as Dean knows, I used to put on these cabaret shows for years in New
I
York
remember.
at different nightclubs. And so I would gather different crazy people. Hey, you do 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. And then I would end with a monologue. And so I was used to gathering people to put on a show, as it were. And then I also did a lot of teaching for like 15 years and teaching creative writing primarily. I taught composition at a business school for like 2 years, but it was mostly creative writing. And so running a creative writing class was a lot like running a writer's room in television. There was a lot certain parallels. And so I enjoyed both experiences, solo and collaborative, but I think my inclination is mostly to be a loner, to be
Mhm,
alone.
mhm,
The TV collaboration stuff was amazing, like because the best part of it would be like it was like a wedding, like if you go to a really good wedding that lasts like a whole long weekend and everyone gets to know each other, or summer camp or summer stock theater where friendships really form, like shooting a TV show for 2 or 3 months. Like the best part was this family that would, there was a lot of stress and tension, but it was also like, it was like extended art summer camp or extended wedding. So that part was really fun. And then to have like, as I learned more and more about filmic things, to come up with crazier and crazier big images in both shows, and then have these crews and directors and costume people who could pull it off. It was like, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's
I
funny. Uh,
Go ahead.
what I was going to say was that, like, I've mentioned it before that, like, I've always uh, felt like working, being a writer for me is always like working in a vacuum. So I always kind of cherished working with people. And now listening to you, I'm like, wow, he actually likes working by himself, like not that it's like more or the other, or it's just that you're comfortable working on your own stuff. And I'm wondering if like I have a fear of working by myself. So I'm wondering what kind of advice would you give to me for getting over that fear?
Well, I mean, I mean, I don't know what necessarily you're afraid of, or maybe like, but the main thing with writing books or a novel is consistency and in terms of time and schedule. So it's like, because like in your case, you mentioned if I was to be like a book doctor, but I would have to examine you more closely. And, like talk like, okay, I put it down, I come back to it, and and I know when I put things down, I lose the dream. And then you're such a different person, like when you began that book 5 years ago and where you are now, like what's interesting to you, where your spirit's at. And like I know with my novel, The Extra Man and Wake Up Sir, both those books, and I was a much slower writer then, took me 4 or 5 years, but I was working at them pretty consistently. And so thematically, even in my spirit, I wasn't changing that much so that I could maintain like this long process, like an opera within me.
Right.
But the first thing I would say is like, if you really want to get this book done, and I don't know what other pressures you have in your life or what you need to do to bring in money or other projects, this and that, and family, but is to, whether it be 4 days a week or 3 days a week, that you have this set aside time, so that even your unconscious is preparing for when you can sit down and not just like, oh, I think I'll work on the novel tonight, or,
Mhm.
or waiting, like have that set aside time almost like a practice, because also we've got to generate so many pages we don't use. And so
Yeah.
you really need the time and and just I don't know. I don't know about this fear of being alone. I don't know. Maybe you feel like, uh, you know, you need someone else to. I know one thing writers have is like they think there's a magical editor out there for them,
Yeah.
and that's gonna like fix everything. And so they maybe don't have to solve it, and but they'll put it down. But maybe they, on some level, they know there is no magical editor out there and that you have to be your own editor. But you have all these books you love that can teach you, that you can study. Like how'd they do that? Like one thing I learned from Stark is have these numbered chapters, not too long, so that the reader always feels like they're going,
Mm.
and that they're moving forward through time in a linear fashion. And but I think also, maybe you don't like being alone for prolonged times, but that way, if you know you have a schedule, okay, I don't know what your life is like, but Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I know, after my kid goes to school, I can be at the desk from 11 to 2 every day.
Mm.
And it's only 3 hours. You can do that. And, and it's always good to go back like 5 or 10 pages, get back into your own story, fix a few sentences, get back into the music of what you're doing and then move forward. Anyways, any of that helpful or
Absolutely.
applicable?
Oh my goodness, you kidding me? Probably not just helping me, you're probably helping a lot of people watching just saying that. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Also, and thank you, John and Vito. Like, I think because you're a comic book writer and you don't draw necessarily, you're used to uh, having to collaborate or other people be
Right.
involved in that
Right.
story. So I think that's another reason why you're there. And then speaking to what Jonathan said about trying to write chapters that move, I remember reading Warren Ellis's Crooked Little Vein novel, and at one point you're turning pages and they're quick chapters. And I remember I was so impressed by this. I turned the page and it was like chapter number whatever, and it was one sentence. The chapter was one sentence, and I love that so much. I
Yeah.
have two more questions and then a bonus. Uh, so the next question, I'm going to say that for toward the last. All right, Jonathan, you're well known for being an entertaining raconteur and orator at book events. You tell your stories with great wit and pathos. But when you do the audio recordings of your book, sans audience, is there a different consideration? What's it like to read your own words out loud with no one responding? And how does that affect your performance?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess, I used to be a rock on tour, Dean, back in the New York days, and that chapter of my life has kind of ended. I used to perform at the Moth a lot and shows, and I don't feel the need or the wish to do that like I used to for whatever reason. I did so much of it. I mean, in the New York days, from like the mid 90s until I moved to LA in 2014, between the Moth and my own stuff. So let's say we're talking about a 20-year period. I must have given, 1,000 or more readings or something crazy, just like, and Moth per shows. I don't know. I'm trying to think of 20 years, let's say 50 a year for 20 years, but that would be once a week. Maybe that's too much. So maybe 40 a year, but there was times when I was performing a lot. So we're talking like 800 public speaking engagements um, over a 20-year period. So yeah, I used to do a lot of that and I enjoyed it and connecting with the audience and making people laugh and I always, I, would have this thing. Before I'd go on stage, I thought, let me be of service to these people. Let me show them a good time. That would make it less about whether you did poorly or not, or ego or something. Of course, ego's always involved in human endeavors to a certain extent, but I also wanted to be a clown to entertain. And so, yeah, so when I read the audiobooks, which I started doing when and I know there's always been audiobooks that have been around for a long time, but when Audible came around, that was, must have been the early 2000s. And I think it was less frequent for authors to record their own books, but I started doing that with Audible when they first began. And in fact, back then, I had separate contracts with Audible not connected to my publishers. And in the beginning, the technology was pretty rough. Like if I made a mistake recording, I had to go all the way back to the beginning of the sentence. Now it's like if you make a mistake, you can just pause. They're very good at editing and splicing together. And so the first two books I recorded were like nerve-wracking, The Extra Man and Wake Up, Sir. But I had so much experience reading those out loud over the years that and you do have someone listening. You have like a director, usually can sometimes see them through the glass or not. But yeah, it's not an easy task with the books, because like you're sitting in this booth and you want to make it entertaining, but it's like kind of, if your stomach gurgles, you got to start over if you mispronounce, and then you have the sound engineer and the director like, actually it's pronounced like that. Oh, and one funny thing, there was this Buddhist term that I was always mispronouncing, which is, and I might have reverted to my mispronunciation, samsara. I think it's samsara, but I was calling it samsara the whole time. And because I also had and samsara is basically this thing that we all experience in life of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. It can be compulsive behavior, just any of the things we do that kind of bring us suffering that we repeat endlessly, whether it be tropes in relationships or neuroses or looping thinking. So samsara is a big Buddhist concept. And I guess my engineer and director, so I recorded the whole book, and then at a certain point, then the publisher gets it, and then there's some notes. Like they caught some things and it turned out like 18 times, probably in the course of the book, I had mispronounced samsara. And so that it was just sort of funny that like this thing, which is all about making the same mistake over and over again, I had done that with the recording, and I had to go back through and splice in samsara, or I had to repeat the whole sentence. And yeah. So anyway,
Wow.
I heard that people enjoy the audiobook versions that I do. And,
I
so
enjoyed it.
yeah, so thank you. So, and I try to read them with some flair, or and I certainly know the pacing or the emphasis. One thing that's really hard with the audiobooks is doing the dialogue of the other characters, which again, there's a suspension of disbelief, I imagine, for the listener. I've not listened to these things myself, that the author is doing an approximation of these voices, but like I had to do a youngish English woman. I'm like, oh man. And but the director's like, just do a little bit of an English accent, and I guess it works good enough, but that was worrisome to me.
It didn't
That's
take me
funny.
out.
All
Like
right.
I was still invested. You did well.
Thank you, Vito.
One last big question from me, and then a bonus question. Vito, you have something, or should I do it?
Go ahead. I mean, the only thing no, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Uh,
What's that from? Go ahead. Go ahead. What? Oh, that's
okay.
go ahead. Maybe that's
Um,
Rorschach from Welcome Back, Cotter, who might have been influenced by Ratso Rizzo in Midnight Cowboy. Go ahead. Go
Eh,
ahead. Go ahead, Dean. Go ahead.
wait, what did she say? She goes, "You shouldn't have asked. You should have just done it." That's from Saturday Night Fever when he doesn't walk her across the street or whatever. Anyway, okay. You're well known for having written many autobiographical essays that have been collected. The book collection that first endeared me to you is called What's Not to Love. In your HBO show Bored to Death, you named your protagonist Jonathan Ames. Anyone who is familiar with your stories could easily assume your main characters are iterations of you, which is not a stretch for most writers. I mean, anyone who knows me can see me in my characters like Billy Dogma, the Red Hook, Chestface, etc. Here's my question. Is your fiction more emotionally true than your memoirs? Do you feel the latitude of fiction allows you to dig deeper into the soul of a character, that character being you?
Uh, Dean, you should have an NPR show or something. Like these are like, you know what I mean? Like the way you write the questions sounds very NPR. I'm not saying Vito, you shouldn't have an NPR, but like his
Oh no,
his
I
his rhythm
stammer
with
and
these questions.
I'm trying to find the words, and I stop for a second. Dean's done the right thing by writing them all down. If we get anywhere with this podcast, it's because of that.
Yeah. But anyway, well, first of all, I mean, as Dean knows, like I actually haven't written autobiographical nonfiction in almost 20 years now. Like, but I wrote a ton of it in the late 90s or yeah, the late 90s when I started writing for New York Press in 96. And then I stopped writing that column, I think in 2000. But in 4 years, I wrote a column every other week for this throwaway newspaper. And then I had a few more years after that, like where magazines, remember there used to be magazines, the like a lot of the young guys and gals who read my essays then got jobs working for magazines. They're like, "Hey, could you write something for GQ? I used to love your column that, in that crazy free newspaper, the New York Press." And then I'd write articles for these magazines, and they invariably, almost 75% of the time, would kill them because they're like, "This isn't quite GQ." And but they had recruited me because they liked the voice in those pieces. And so back then when I was writing that stuff, they were meant to entertain, and I made myself a character, and there was like some real honesty there, but I was also a character, made myself a character, and Bukowski was like a big role model. Had loved his nonfiction that had appeared in throwaway newspapers in the late 60s, early 70s before he quit, or maybe right around the time he quit the post office. But so, and then I think as a carryover from having written a column where I was a character, and also predating the column, I was doing a lot of monologues, telling my
Mm.
stories, kind of like I called it stand-up storytelling. My friend Patrick Buckaloo called it stand-up tragedy, what he did instead of stand-up comedy. And Spalding Gray was my role model. So again, there was two things in the 90s that I was doing a lot of, which was like sort of quote unquote confessional essays, kind of like David Sedaris, and monologues on stage. And that's why, when the Moth started, I'd been telling stories in New York for about 5 or 6 years, and they heard of me. And that's why they included me, and I became a host and was part of the Moth from the beginning. But then by the early 2000s, I stopped doing that stuff. Like I said earlier, I was repeating myself, it was becoming shtick. and it didn't feel honest. But part of that carryover, that using myself as a character, there were two big things I did. The Alcoholic, where the character was named Jonathan A., and then Bored to Death, where the character was named Jonathan Ames. So I was still playing very much with the persona, but I haven't done that now, like since Bored to Death, which let's say originated in 2007. So it's now in 18 years, I'm not really playing with me as a character anymore, though, of course, I did it for the seasons of the show. And I'm sort of long-winded every question, but Bored to Death, the short story came out of this thing that you're talking about back then, because when I would write my nonfiction, people would say, "Oh, you made that up." And then when they would read my novels, like The Extra Man or Wake Up, Sir, or I Pass Like Night, they'd be like, "Why didn't you call that a memoir?" But it was like
Right.
fiction. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to write a piece of fiction that reads like one of my essays. So
Mhm.
Bored to Death was written in the voice of my Jonathan Ames essays, where Jonathan Ames puts an ad on Craigslist. Remember Craigslist? That was the thing back then, advertising himself as an unlicensed private detective. And like I said, I wrote it for Esquire. They commissioned me to write a short story. They rejected it. And so I sent it to Dave Eggers, who I was acquaintance with at the time and had his email. I think later I learned he doesn't have email anymore, which is cool, or maybe he does. But anyway, I was able to email it to him directly, which was cool. He's like such an amazing writer and all the things he's done. And and he got back to me because I said, "Hey, I'd like to submit this to McSweeney's." And he got back to me like, just like a few days later. He's like, "Hey, I love this. I want to publish it. Did this really happen?" And I thought, "Oh my God, it worked. I
Mhm.
fooled this guy, this genius, Dave Eggers. He wrote that book, The Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius. I fooled this genius into thinking that this piece of fiction happened." So, and then when miraculously I was able to turn it into a TV show, the producer who I was working with, she still thought I should call the character Jonathan Ames, like continue that frisson of like the creator was also had that name. And then there was a
Mhm.
character based on you, Dean, the
Mhm.
Ray
Mhm.
character, who I named Ray Houston because Ray was kind of like Dean, like a cool name. Like Dean is a cool name to me because of On the Road, and Dean Moriarty is Jack Kerouac's cool friend, and Ray was like a cool name. And then I named him Ray Houston, which was like the last name of your dear friend.
Mike
So I,
Houston, yeah, Mike
yeah,
Houston's my best friend. Yeah, so you combined us together, and then I got to draw all the comics that Ray drew, and then the opening credit sequence I helped work on, which got us an Emmy. Pretty
so,
great, pretty
so it
awesome.
was like, so it wasn't you, but the art was you, and
Right,
like
right.
Jonathan character and that. I don't think we got to see any of his writing per se, but
No,
anyway,
but it's speaking of like I was as I was reading Carmadol and obviously previous things you've written, but especially for some reason there was something going on in Carmadol, and I think some of it has to do with father stuff that's in the book that I don't want to spoil. Um, I was just texting you or writing or calling you and saying, "Oh my God, this is a memoir." Like you
I know,
basically,
but again, it's that same thing that I was, because like even in my first novels, but you know, and I think, look, writers draw upon themselves, but this guy is not me. Like the
right.
circumstances of his life are not me. But every now and then he must express things I think, but I also have to give him his own weird takes on stuff because he's had a different background. But yeah, I think that's part of the thing of first person literature that, like, for example, everyone probably thought J.D. Salinger was Holden Caulfield,
Right.
and maybe that's why Salinger eventually stopped writing or something or stopped publishing. But yeah, Doll is not me. But and some of these responses to questions I've given before, but I remember seeing some sort of interview, or maybe it was some essay that F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote, where he saw his various protagonists as like his brothers, and there was his like good-hearted brother. There was his lost brother. There was his confused brother. And so I've often seen some of my protagonists as cousins. Like we're related, we share a lot of the same DNA, but they're not me, including the ones that were in those essays 20 years ago, including, the one in the graphic novel.
Well, Vito, I have a bonus question, and I also want to raise a toast to somebody
Oh,
that passed
sure.
away today.
Yeah,
Oh, no.
please.
So I'll do the guy. So one of my favorite, I don't even know what kind of actor you call him, like a
Character
B
actor.
actor, a D actor, or whatever, a character actor. Wings Hauser passed away, I think this morning or today, and he's in one of my favorite like exploitation films called Vice Squad. I don't know if any of you guys have seen Vice Squad. He's also in Dead Men Don't Dance, and he's just look him up. He's nuts, and
Hmm.
he passed away at age 77. And his son Cole Hauser
Oh,
plays Rip on
Yeah,
Yellowstone.
I didn't know that was his son.
Yeah, that's his
um,
son. So
okay.
cheers to Wings Hauser. Rest in peace.
I'm lifting some cold.
Uh,
Well,
boom.
you got a drink over there, Jane.
Yep.
Dean.
And then my bonus question um, is um, Jonathan, you share the same birthday as my mother, Barbara Haspiel, in a
Hi,
few
Barbara.
days.
Hi,
Hi,
Barbara.
Barbara.
Does she
In
listen
a
to
few
your pod?
days.
Does she listen to your podcasts?
I don't think so, but she's going to have to now because of this. So, anyway, happy early birthday, Jonathan. I know it's coming up.
Happy golf birthday. Anyway, just
I asked my mother if she had a question for you, and this is what she texted me verbatim.
Oh, awesome.
your
Okay, here we
mom's
go.
awesome. She's a great lady.
So here's the question. Ask him if he feels older or younger on his birthday. As I get older, it makes me feel younger or just lucky I have the privilege of age. But he is way too young to feel that way. Just ask if he feels like a fire symbol. Aries? With a question mark.
Hmm. Interesting. I mean, I'm going to be 61, which is like kind of an intense, any like since crossing the 60 threshold, I mean, our world is changing, obviously, in all sorts of ways. I mean, people generally do live longer. Like my grandfather died at, I think, 71, and he seemed so old back in 1981 when he died at 71 or 72. So I don't know. I still feel so like young in some way. Like I'm still like trying to make it as a writer or so like I don't know or I'm sometimes very deferential to people like I'm just a 26-year-old who hasn't figured anything out yet, but instead I'm a 61-year-old who hasn't figured anything out yet, though I was able to talk with some confidence about a few of these craft things, but they're just my experiences. But yeah, so I don't know, Barbara. It's really weird because you also know, like actuarial table wise, that even if people are living longer, I'm looking at my last big stretch, and I also know from being a caretaker of my parents what the latter years look like, and so it's just interesting. But again, everything comes back to the cliche: one day at a time, here right now. Be kind right now. Uh, you know, Try to let go of our fears and our anxieties, you know, be loving, be of service. And, in my case, sit at my desk and write my sentences. That gives me pleasure, personal pleasure. And so, yeah, anyway, I'm not a big birthday person. I never really have parties or anything like that. I don't know. I'm sort of aware, like, oh, this is that day, and I try to enjoy, like, I'm not that connected. I'm not on social media, so, but a few people will reach out to me, and so yeah, it's a weird one, but yeah, it's so interesting. Your mom and I share a birthday, and then you and I should have such a wonderful long friendship. And then I also just like adore your mom and forget the last time I saw her. Maybe when we were down in Florida, like 2018 or something, for the Miami Book Fair. Yeah, yeah.
Probably. Yeah.
I think I remember hanging out with her there. That might have been my main hangout time with her in life, but my memory's pretty shot. Um,
Mm.
It's
Well,
pretty
but
no, I.
funny. It's pretty funny that Jonathan and your mom have the same birthdays, and you, Dean, and my mom have the same birthday.
Oh, that's
whoa,
right.
that is some
Like,
interesting
yeah,
astrological activity.
we're all
That's
connected
great.
somehow by the
That's right.
stars, I guess.
Well, they
Speaking
say
of
we're stardust.
speaking of your sentences, I just wanted to read finally like this sentence that I absolutely love from, I think it's the third, maybe the second chapter. I thought $15,000 not to be me anymore was a bargain, a once in a lifetime deal, and not just because a new face might keep me safe from the people who wanted to kill me. I think that sentence just gives me chills every time I read it. Love it.
Oh, thank you.
It's great. Well, I don't know. Was it? Did we cover? I thought we had a good little parlay here. You
Oh, yeah.
know.
I mean, I'm sorry if a lot of my answers were long and boring.
No,
So-
nothing to be sorry about.
I love self-deprecating Jonathan Ames.
No, but
He's
I
like
went
spewing
on.
gold, and he's just like he once said that he felt like a clown with cancer, and I never forgot that
Really? I don't remember that line.
he
Sometimes
said
people
that.
tell me things I've said, or even someone quoted me like in an email, someone I've worked with, they quoted me like this line. I'm like, oh, that's really good. And it was like from my own novel, Wake Up, Sir. And I forget, I don't even remember what it was, but yeah, no, I do feel that I went on a bit at times in response to your questions, but they were very thoughtful, and I guess I do have long-winded answers that unspool, and
Well, that's
so
what
I
we're
think
here
that,
for. That's what we're
yeah,
here for, is
but
to just have conversation and don't worry about it.
and
So.
people like podcasts, right? They walk around and they listen to them, and when they're driving and stuff or walking, or when do people listen to podcasts? I know this is weird. I've never actually listened to a podcast. Um,
Usually like in their cars or if they're doing any kind of home like mowing the lawn or something like that. I think a lot
I
of
listen
people
to tons of podcasts because once I figured out what I need to draw or I've written something and it's just like the craft or the execution of drawing or inking or something, I want to be surrounded by people and I'm usually in a room alone, at night. So I listen to a lot of podcasts at night or, comedy. The thing I haven't figured out what to do and it occurred to me recently, like I have a lot of DVDs and movies with where they're the extras are like director's commentary while the movie's playing. If I've already seen the movie and I want to hear a director talk or actors, whatever, I should be playing those in the background as well.
mm,
So anyway, that's I think it's a way to keep company. And I think some podcasts are very produced and some are very loose because you just want company. And maybe your ear dips in and out, of the conversation or something sparks, and that's what it is for me.
cool.
I think one of the nicer things people have said about this podcast is that it does sound like they're friends in the background talking,
hmm
like just two guys talking about anything.
hmm Yeah, well, you guys are both very personable, and
Thank
you you look like pals.
we look like pals.
Hey, you do. I don't know. You got a similar spirit in a good way.
No, I think that's when what convinced me to do this with Vito is because when I talk to Vito, an hour goes by quickly, like on the phone or something. I'm like, I'm calling him for 5 minutes and it's 60 minutes somehow. It just
yeah.
goes by. Same thing with you, Jonathan. You and I get on the phone and I'm like, I gotta get on my bike in 5 minutes and it's an hour later, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Anyway,
Thank
well, thank you so much, Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you, man. This
Thank
is
you
great.
guys for having me. And I know you had mentioned wanting to talk about chest face, but sometime we'll maybe do a podcast where we talk about your work.
Oh, we're doing actually a chest face thing soon that I can invite you to if you want to. It's kind of you've been on one of my other Kickstarters where we do the Zoom party,
Yeah.
but whatever.
I know, like oh yeah, you and I exchanged an email. I won't get into it because we're still recording, but um, animating chest face and like writing some stand-up comedy for him to do, like even like
Oh,
two
wait,
minutes.
Wait
You
till you see what's coming up. I haven't even told Vito yet.
got to
Something's
do that because Chest Face is like one of your best visual, like all your art is so beautiful. Like Vito, one thing I'm always telling Dean is like blow up his work and put them in like some gallery. It would like the art, it would just blow people away. It's so weird and crazy and beautiful, and these characters are so outrageous. And Chest Face is like one of the best, and his mouth, and like he's like doing stand up, and it's like, hey, you in the front audience, front row, take my
with that
wife.
Rodney
Hey.
Dangerfield all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's like chest face. It's
I
like
get
take
no
my wife,
respect.
please. Hey, what's going on? I get no respect. This chest face here, you know.
Oh my
You got
God.
nerve saying you're not a raconteur anymore. Look at that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
he can't
you
help
gotta you
himself,
gotta
right?
animate that guy, or your Legion of Heroes like Chest Face, Billy Dogma, Red Hook.
Yeah.
I mean, these are cool creations.
Thanks. You've always had my back, and I appreciate it. The both of you guys. Thank you. So,
Well, great to meet you, Vito.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. My pleasure.
All right, well, on we go.
All right.
and
I
did
guess.
you hit the record button, the OK on the record button
Oh
there,
no,
Jonathan?
I
Make
forgot.
sure.
No, I'm kidding. I'm
Oh,
kidding.
okay.
Of
All
course I
right.
did.
Yeah, did
Uh,
you
All right.
stop or and then
well, we're gonna
No,
do
we'll
our
just
sign
leave.
off,
okay,
and
Oh,
just
you got to do a sign off. Oh, wait,
yeah. So
actually, Jonathan actually has a sign off. I don't know if you need water, if you can do it.
I could do it. I could do it.
You want to explain it real quick?
Yeah. So Vito, I don't know. Did you ever go to my shows back in the day? Or
I might have because I used to
oh,
go to the Moth, so I might have, and I'm not aware of it. But yeah.
oh. Well, sometimes I did it at the Moth. I'm not sure, but anyway, I always used to end my readings with this, and there was a whole story around it. But when I didn't tell the story, I would often end, and so I would say something like, "I'm going to end, tonight's reading with this sound my friends and I would make on the playground when being attacked by more normal children. It's a kind of cry for help, known as the Harry call." Because in the 70s, when you're going hairy, you're going crazy. And me and a bunch of friends, we called ourselves the Harryators, and we communicate in this language. Like it sounded like this. What's up? Like all these sounds. And so then when we were being attacked, though, two of us would be attacked, the sound got louder. And the strongest of the three of us, who was known as Fat Eater, he was the son of a chiropractor, and he knew how people's bodies work. So he'd kick kids in the ankle and sweep them over, and they'd topple over. Me and this other boy. Anyway, so here's what a loud, hairy call, cry for help sounds like. I'll just do one. I used to do three on a stage, but I'll just do one. I always did the same position. And it might not record because these things are sensitive. It might shut off.
It totally shut off.
Oh
And now
God,
you're dying.
they're out of practice.
I don't. Did you hear it, Vito? It just
No.
shuts right out right at the beginning, and then it's
All
gone.
right.
So
You could find
that
it somewhere else and maybe dub it in or
we could
something.
dub it in, but we at least should dub in the flush. So if you want to,
Yeah,
Oh,
I'll dumb in the flush. I'll dumb in the flush every time he does the screen.
because they'll hear us talking about that. It's going to cut out. So.
yeah, yeah. Oh my
Oh,
God.
that was great.
I got this message. Set up professional audio and audio settings. Clearly, it sounds like something out of control happened.
Oh boy. Oh
Oh,
boy.
Jonathan, thank you so much.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. And I guess exit.
Yep. Leave. Thank you.
Hit stage
See you
left.
later.
All right, guys. Be
Good
well.
night.
You too.